The wind bit sharp, a relentless whisper against her worn coat, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant rain. The sky, a vast canvas of unbroken gray, seemed to press down on the city, muffling its usual clamor into a dull, distant hum. She stood by the window, a silhouette against the fading light, her gaze fixed on nothing in particular, just the blurred shapes of buildings dissolving into the twilight. Each day melted into the next, an indistinguishable stream of hours marked only by the growing ache in her chest. A profound weariness had settled deep within her bones, heavier than any physical burden. Her hands, once quick and purposeful, now lay still, clasped loosely, as if holding on to the last vestiges of a warmth that had long since departed. The silence in the small apartment was not peaceful. It was a vast, echoing void, a constant reminder of what was no longer there. She remembered laughter, the easy warmth of shared moments, the certainty of a future stretching out, bright and clear. Now those memories were like faded photographs, beautiful but distant, almost belonging to someone else's life. A tremor ran through her, not from the cold, but from the raw, exposed feeling of being utterly alone. She had prayed, oh how she had prayed, until her voice was a hoarse whisper and her knees ached on the cold floor. Each plea had vanished into the vast, indifferent expanse, met only by an overwhelming quiet. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a chilling answer to her desperate questions. Had the world simply forgotten her? Had the divine hand, once felt so surely in moments of grace, withdrawn completely? A bitter taste rose in her throat. She felt adrift, a small, solitary boat cast out onto an endless dark sea, with no compass, no stars, and no guiding light. The path ahead was obscured, the path behind, a landscape of broken pieces. Her spirit, once vibrant, now felt like a fragile, dying ember, threatened by the slightest breath of despair. She longed for a sign, a whisper, anything to suggest that she was not truly invisible, not utterly forsaken. But there was only the cold, the dim light, and the profound, relentless ache of an unanswered prayer. The world moved on, oblivious, and she remained, a silent figure in a silent world, waiting for an intervention that seemed would never come. The days folded into weeks, the weeks into months, each one a whisper of time passing, yet leaving no discernible mark on the landscape of her sorrow. The world outside continued its relentless turning, seasons shifting from the stark, biting cold to the hesitant green of spring, then the heavy warmth of summer, and back again to the melancholic hues of autumn. Yet, within the quiet confines of her life, a different kind of season prevailed, a perpetual winter of the soul. She moved through her routines with the mechanical precision of a clockwork doll, each gesture devoid of its former grace. The simple acts of living, breathing, eating, sleeping became burdens, heavy weights on a spirit already bowed. Her gaze, once bright and curious, now held a deep, unyielding fatigue, a reflection of the endless questions that circled within her mind like restless birds. She would stand by the window, watching the rain streak down the pane, or the slow descent of snowflakes, and a profound emptiness would settle over her, a vast, echoing chamber where once hope had resided. The silence grew not just in the apartment, but within her very being. It was a silence that spoke louder than any shout, a testament to an absence she couldn't comprehend. Where was the comfort she had always known? Where was the gentle hand that had guided her through past storms? She searched for it in the quiet moments before dawn, in the deep shadows of dusk, in the fleeting dreams that offered no solace. But there was only the vast, indifferent expanse, a cosmic void where her fervent prayers seemed to vanish without a trace. Her faith, once a sturdy anchor, now felt like a frayed rope, threatening to snap under the relentless pressure of unanswered pleas. She remembered the stories, the unwavering conviction she had once held, the certainty that everything has a purpose. But how could purpose exist in this desolate landscape? How could a loving hand, allow such a profound and prolonged ache? The questions were not accusations, but desperate cries from a wounded heart, a soul grappling with the chasm between what she believed and what she felt. She didn't abandon her belief entirely, not truly. It was a deeper, more agonizing struggle. She felt like a lost child, calling out for a parent who was surely there, somewhere, but remained agonizingly silent. Each sunrise felt like a test, each sunset a quiet judgment. She continued to place one foot in front of the other, not out of conviction, but out of a simple, primal instinct to survive. It was a silent endurance, a testament to a strength she didn't know she possessed, fueled by a faint, almost imperceptible flicker of hope that refused to be extinguished entirely, even in the deepest shadows of doubt. This persistent, unyielding silence from above became her constant companion, a presence more profound than any spoken word, shaping her world into a landscape of quiet yearning and unresolved questions. She waited, not with expectation, but with a weary resignation, for something to break the spell, for a whisper, a sign, anything to suggest that she was not truly forgotten, that the silence was not an end, but perhaps a different kind of beginning. She continued her days, each a pale echo of the last, her spirit a fragile ship adrift on an endless sea of quiet sorrow. One afternoon, a faint, almost imperceptible shift occurred. She was not seeking, not hoping, merely existing, her movements mechanical, her gaze distant. Her hand, idly tracing the worn spine of an old forgotten book on a dusty shelf, paused. It was a collection of poems, a gift from long ago, its cover soft with age, its title blurred by the passage of time. She hadn't opened it in years, perhaps not since before the shadow fell. A strange impulse, a whisper she couldn't name, prompted her to pull it down. The pages, brittle and yellowed, exhaled the faint scent of old paper and dried lavender, a breath from a forgotten past. As she gently turned them, a small, pressed flower fell onto her lap. It was a forget-me-not, its tiny blue petals, still vibrant despite the passage of time, a miniature relic of a spring long past. She remembered placing it there, a quiet moment shared with someone she loved, a promise whispered under a sky full of possibility. The memory was sharp, a sudden, unexpected pang, yet it was not entirely painful. It carried a strange, soft warmth, like a fleeting sunbeam piercing through the perpetual gray of her present. She held the fragile bloom between her fingers, its delicate form a stark contrast to the heavy weight in her soul. It was just a flower, a forgotten token, yet in that instant, the relentless silence of her apartment seemed to soften, if only for a breath. It wasn't a voice, not a grand revelation, but a subtle brush against the fabric of her desolation. For a fleeting moment she felt a connection, not to the divine, not yet, but to a part of herself she thought had withered entirely. A forgotten tenderness stirred, a faint echo of beauty in a world that had seemed to hold none. She didn't understand why this tiny, dried flower held such a power, why it had chosen this precise moment to reappear. It was a question without an answer, a quiet mystery, but it was something, a tiny seed of warmth, planted in the barren ground of her heart, waiting. Her fingers closed gently around the tiny, fragile bloom. It was more than just a flower. It was a fragment of a past self, a whisper from a time when laughter came easily and the future felt boundless. Holding it, she felt a subtle shift, a faint tremor in the deep, cold bedrock of her sorrow. The memory it evoked was no longer a source of sharp pain, but a bittersweet echo, carrying with it a strange, almost forgotten tenderness. She recalled the day she had pressed it, a spontaneous gesture during a walk, a moment of shared joy under a bright, indifferent sky. That moment, once dismissed as mere coincidence, now seemed imbued with a delicate significance. The quiet of her apartment, once a heavy blanket of despair, began to transform. It was still silence, yes, but no longer an empty void. Instead, it became a vast, resonant space, like the pause between musical notes, holding the potential for something new to emerge. She found herself noticing things she had overlooked for months. The way a single shaft of sunlight, thin and ethereal, pierced through the clouds and illuminated dust motes dancing in the air. The persistent, hopeful chirp of a sparrow outside her window, a tiny declaration of life against the urban hum, the faint, comforting scent of old books that had always been there, but had only now registered. These were not grand revelations, but small, persistent threads, weaving themselves into the tattered fabric of her perception. Her mind, once trapped in an endless loop of why, began to explore new pathways. What if the emptiness she had felt was not an absence, but a clearing? What if the journey adrift, so far from everything familiar, was not punishment, but preparation? The question shifted, subtly, from accusation to inquiry, from despair to a hesitant curiosity. It was as if a long, dormant seed within her soul had felt the first touch of spring rain, stirring in the darkness, reaching tentatively for the light. A warmth, faint but undeniable, began to spread from her chest, a sensation foreign after so much cold. It was not the fiery passion of immediate joy, but a serene, quiet glow, like the first blush of dawn painting the horizon after a long, dark night. She looked at the forget-me-not again, its delicate blue, a testament to enduring beauty, and a profound realization began to settle in her heart. Nothing, she intuited, was truly lost. Perhaps everything had a purpose, even the deepest valleys, even the most profound silences. The pain had been real, immense, but it had also, perhaps, been a crucible, refining her spirit, stripping away the superfluous to reveal something essential beneath. The sense of being utterly alone began to recede, replaced by a nascent feeling of connection. Not to a visible presence, but to an underlying current. A gentle, invisible hand guiding her through the shadowed waters. The silence, once a symbol of abandonment, now felt like a sacred space, a sanctuary where she could finally hear the quiet whispers of her own soul, and perhaps a deeper resonance echoing from beyond. It was a fragile, nascent hope, but it was there, a flickering candle in a room that had been plunged into darkness for too long. She had wandered adrift, yes, and in that wandering, in the very echo of her emptiness, she was beginning to discern the faint outline of a path leading back, not to what was lost, but to a deeper, more profound sense of home within herself. A home built on a rediscovered faith. The heavy burden on her chest eased, not completely, but enough to allow a deeper breath, a breath filled with the subtle promise of a dawning day. The heavy burden on her chest eased, not completely, but enough to allow a deeper breath, a breath filled with the subtle promise of a dawning day. That subtle promise, once a fleeting whisper, began to bloom, slowly, tentatively, like a winter-weary plant reaching for the first warmth of spring. It wasn't an abrupt awakening, but a gradual unfolding, a softening of the edges of her world, allowing light to seep into spaces long shadowed. The quiet of her apartment remained, yet its nature had irrevocably changed. No longer a vast, desolate expanse, it became a sanctuary, a canvas upon which new meaning was being painted. She would sit by the window, not in despair, but in a tranquil contemplation, watching the city breathe. The distant hum, once a reminder of her isolation, now seemed like the gentle pulse of life, a collective heartbeat she was, at last, a part of. The rain, instead of mirroring her tears, cleansed the world, leaving behind a fresh, vibrant clarity. The sunlight, when it broke through the clouds, felt like a deliberate, personal touch, warming her skin, reminding her of an unseen presence. She began to revisit the memories that had once been shards of glass in her heart. The laughter, the shared moments, the dreams that had shattered. She looked at them not with the sting of loss, but with a profound, almost sacred reverence. It was as if a veil had been lifted from her eyes, allowing her to see the intricate tapestry of her life, even the darkest threads, as essential to the whole. The pain, once a tormentor, now seemed like a sculptor, chiseling away the unnecessary, revealing a strength and resilience she hadn't known she possessed. Each tear shed, each moment of profound loneliness, was no longer a sign of abandonment, but a necessary passage, a sacred wilderness through which her spirit had to wander to find its truest bearings. She understood, with a clarity that brought both tears and immense relief, that the silence had not been an absence of God, but a profound invitation. It had been the space for her to listen, not to external answers, but to the quiet stirrings within her own soul. The moments she had felt most forgotten, most adrift, were precisely when an invisible hand had been guiding her, preparing her, shaping her. The journey through emptiness had not been a detour, but the very path itself, leading her back to a faith she had believed lost, a true home within her own heart. A profound sense of purpose began to settle over her. Not a grand, explicit mission, but a deep, quiet knowing that everything has a purpose. Even the most agonizing chapters, the most profound heartbreaks, were not random cruelties, but intricate pieces of a larger design, woven with a love too vast for human comprehension. She saw now that the divine plan had never been derailed. It had simply unfolded in ways she could not perceive in her sorrow. The miracle was not a sudden intervention from the outside, but the transformation of her own inner landscape, allowing her to recognize the divine hand in the everyday, the sacred in the mundane. The air in her apartment felt different, lighter, filled with an unspoken grace. She would touch the worn furniture, the familiar objects, and they seemed to hum with a gentle energy. A vase of wilting flowers, which she had neglected to throw away, now spoke of the delicate cycle of life and renewal. A forgotten melody, heard on a distant radio, resonated with newfound meaning, each note a whisper of comfort. It was a silent, profound understanding that washed over her, a deep peace that settled into every fiber of her being. The tears that came now were not of despair, but of gratitude, a quiet overflowing of a heart that had been broken open, only to be filled with an even greater, more expansive love. She was not fixed, she was transformed, she was not saved, she was awakened, and in that awakening she understood that the greatest love had been present all along, a constant, unwavering light, patiently waiting for her to see. The understanding that had dawned within her was not fleeting, it deepened, settling into the quiet corners of her being like soft, pervasive light. The sharp edges of grief, once so defining, began to blur, softening into contours of memory, no longer wounds, but venerable scars that told a story of endurance. She looked back at the landscape of her past, at the valleys of despair and the shadowed paths she had walked, and a profound serenity enveloped her. There was no bitterness left, no lingering resentment for the arduous journey. Instead, a quiet gratitude bloomed, a tender recognition that every step, even the most painful, had been necessary. She understood now that the moments of profound loneliness, the stretches of aching silence, had not been punishments, but preparations. They were the empty canvas upon which a new truth could be painted, the fallow ground waiting for a deeper seed to take root. The tears she had shed, once hot with anguish, now felt like cleansing rain, washing away the dust of illusion and revealing the pure, unblemished core of her spirit. She forgave the world for its perceived indifference, forgave herself for the doubt that had clouded her heart, and, in a profound, unspoken gesture, she released the burden of questioning the divine. The heavy cloak of sorrow, once her constant companion, had fallen away, replaced by an inner lightness. It was not a forgetting, but a profound acceptance. The faces she had loved, the laughter that echoed from distant years, the dreams that had crumbled, they were all held within her, not as ghosts of what was lost, but as sacred threads woven into the fabric of her resilient spirit. Each memory, even those tinged with sadness, now carried a gentle warmth, a testament to the love that had been, and in many ways, still was. she realized that nothing was truly lost, only transformed, reshaped by the passage of time and the crucible of experience. A quiet wisdom settled in her gaze, a reflection of the deep peace she had found. She moved through her days with a newfound grace, her steps lighter, her breath deeper. The simple act of brewing her morning tea, the way the steam curled upwards in delicate tendrils, or the sunlight painting patterns on her floor. These were no longer just mundane occurrences, but small miracles, whispers of the sacred in the everyday. She had learned to listen to the silence, not as an absence, but as a language, a profound way for the universe to communicate, to guide, to nurture. Everything has a purpose. The words resonated within her, not as a platitude, but as a living truth she had come to embody. The waiting, the struggle, the seeming abandonment, it all had led her here, to this quiet harbor of the soul. She was not the same person who had stood by the window in the biting cold, lost and forsaken. She was someone new, forged in the fires of adversity, softened by the balm of understanding, and profoundly grateful for every twist and turn of a journey that had, in its own mysterious way, brought her home. Her heart, once a shattered vessel, was now whole, overflowing with a calm, abiding love for the intricate, beautiful, and often mysterious dance of life. She understood then, with a clarity that surpassed mere thought, that the deepest silences were not voids, but sacred pauses in a symphony of divine love. The path through darkness had not been abandonment, but an unveiling, revealing a purpose woven into every single thread of existence, a love that had always held her. Dear Presence, in the quiet of this moment, I offer my gratitude for the journey, for the lessons learned in shadow and in light. Guide my heart to see your hand in all things, to embrace the unfolding mystery, and to live with an open spirit, full of peace and unwavering trust. May I always remember that, even in the unseen, grace abounds. And so, the world continued to turn, holding within its quiet hum the infinite promise of grace, waiting for every soul to simply listen